The Value of Implementing Reflective Practice at the Organizational Level, led by Dr. Mike Sherman, who is an infant and early childhood mental health clinical consultation manager for the Safe Babies program at 0 to 3. My name is Laura Landers, and I'll be your webinar moderator for today. Before we get started, I want to let you know a little bit about the ARBEST program and do some housekeeping announcements. Arkansas Building Effective Services for Trauma, or ARBEST, is a state-funded program at the UAMS Psychiatric Research Institute, and our aim is to improve mental health services for children and families who have experienced trauma. We work closely with multiple partners to build a more trauma-informed state, and we're probably best known for providing training to mental health professionals on treatments that are effective with helping children and families recover from trauma. A few housekeeping announcements. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can type them into the Q&A and we'll get to those questions at the end. You can also use the chat feature for any comments or responses, but make sure if you have a question to put it in the Q&A so we can see it. If you're interested in earning a CEU, just be sure to stick around at the very end and I'll give you some more instruction on how to obtain that. We are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded to ARBEST's YouTube channel. We have other previously recorded webinars on there too for you to check out. And don't forget to look at us on our ARBEST Facebook page and like us. We frequently post upcoming webinars, training opportunities, and other resources. Today, we have a presenter that I'm really excited about. Dr. Mike Sherman is the Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Clinical Consultation Manager for Safe Babies, a program for 0 to 3. He is a licensed clinical psychologist and a NAPA/UC Davis Infant Parent Mental Health Fellow, with expert training and experience in the field of infant and early childhood mental health. For more than 15 years, he has worked at the nexus of community mental health and child welfare programs, including direct service provision, supervision, training, consulting, program development, and administration. Dr. Sherman's training, clinical practice, and administrative expertise has given him a deep understanding of the needs and barriers in our system of care, and he aims to broaden the capacity of providers, programs, and systems to foster children's social, emotional, and behavioral health and development. So welcome, Dr. Sherman.
Thank you so much, Laura. Glad to be here. Glad to be spending some time with everybody that's able to join us today, thinking about reflective practice and how we can utilize it in ways that go beyond just supporting direct service providers. I'm going to jump right into slides. And again, as Laura said, welcome questions, thoughts, input. I'm going to be keeping an eye on chat as well as Q&A as we go. And so welcome any and all engagement as we're going through this. So just to kind of set a level on what this looks like. Reflective practice, I imagine many of you are familiar with the concept, but in case you're not, reflective practice is the process by which professionals become aware of their implicit knowledge base and really kind of derive learning from our experience. In order to navigate our work, we oftentimes have to be rushed, have to be urgent, right? There's a lot of pressure to service all of the folks coming through our doors. And in the context of societal pressures, in the context of funding pressures, organizational challenges, all kinds of trauma infusion that comes in with people seeking mental health services or working through their situations with the child welfare system or any other really human serving systems, there is a natural tendency to become very compliance driven. And I imagine you see some of that. And so in being kind of the status quo, in navigating our work in a very transactional way, we typically give up, forfeit the opportunity to be reflective. And that comes with some costs. So the idea is that there are 3 types of reflection. And Donald Schoen initially wrote about this in really trying to promote a more reflective approach as practitioners in both the early education sector, in early childhood mental health spaces, and this has been applied in lots and lots of different ways. And Schoen really talked about 3 different types of reflection, right? There's reflection before action. So we have a big meeting coming up with funders next week. And what do we anticipate are some challenges and barriers that might be brought up? What are some things that we want to promote? How do we prepare, right? Those are the thoughts that reflection supports before the event. And you can imagine how that might be more beneficial than just showing up, not knowing what you have to talk about, right? We're all fairly good at doing that if we intentionally slow down enough to do it. I'll jump to the third one and then we'll circle back to the second one. Reflection on action, using that same example, is we've now had our funding meeting. Do we have a debrief afterwards, right? What did we learn from that experience? What did we really feel went well? What could have gone better? How do we unpack some of that? And maybe even talk a little bit about what are some of the pressures that contribute to how we felt in the context of that meeting with our funders. All of those pieces are, and many more, are a part of reflecting on action. The event has happened. Let's reflect on it. What are our takeaways? What can we learn? How do we inform future opportunities through what we just experienced together? How do we break apart the dynamics of our team? Did we work well together? Was it fluid? Did we contribute and build upon each other's ideas? Or was there kind of a sense of competition showing up in the space, right? And what are some of the reasons for that? Reflection in action is really, in my mind, one of the more difficult ones to build, especially if you're talking about folks who aren't trained to really think on their feet as they're doing things. As clinicians, we have some specific training around the kind of developing our metacognitive process, right? Our ability to think about what we're doing as we're doing it. What is the impact of the words coming out of my mouth on the person sitting in front of me? And that is another opportunity, right? To slow down and be not just reactive, but responsive to the things happening around us. And we're going to differentiate those two a little bit more as we go. So just a little bit of foundation, right? We have reflection before action, reflection in action, that's in the course of the event, and then reflection on action. And all three of these can be utilized to together inform our work moving forward. So what does working in order to enhance our reflective capacity, what are some of the payoffs of that? What are some of the benefits? And for those of us who have been line staff, whether that's in early education settings, in community mental health settings, in child welfare settings, whatever, any human service situation, there's more and more of an introduction of the value of reflection in those spaces, right? Whether that's reflective supervision, whether that's reflective consultation, which is a little bit different, whether it's maybe if you're a CEO, there might be some reflective coaching, right? On how do you manage some of these pieces, which gets a little bit more into the organizational space. But at the organizational level, we don't often think about reflective practice as being impactful to things like culture development, to infusing multiple perspectives, diverse perspectives into how we think about problem solving, right? All of those pieces can be enhanced through reflective practice. So let's take a look at just a few of the ways in which it can be helpful. So one is enhancing relational quality. How are all of the folks within your organization working together? If all we do is react, right? If we have a culture of putting out fires and we're running around putting out fires, we don't have a lot of time to really pause and think, how is my way of being impacting the people around me? There's not a lot of space for empathy, for perspective taking, right? It's just a lot of churn. We run from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. We go home tired, overwhelmed. We come back the next day to do the same thing all over again. How do we build in those pauses, right? And they don't have to be like, hey, everybody's going to sit for 2 hours a day in reflection in order to inform their work. It's incremental, sometimes seconds, just enough to recognize walking into a meeting, how am I feeling? What am I bringing with me from this morning that doesn't really live in this space? And how do I acknowledge that? Maybe compartmentalize it, maybe process it, maybe work through it in some other space, but let me enter this upcoming meeting with clarity and focus and presence, rather than just rushing to the next thing that's on my agenda, right? So it's really allowing for us to focus a little bit more on a relational way of being rather than a transactional way of being. And that's what drives organizational culture. Another thing is we're building in intentionality into our decision making. Imagine the typical setting that we work in, right? How often are we finding ourselves feeling urgent to come up with solutions, to make decisions? And I'm not suggesting that those decisions don't have some urgency to them. But when we default to urgency, we miss an opportunity to get to the best solution rather than the first solution that makes us feel like we can check mark the box. And arriving at that first solution might be great, but do we pause and say, does this maximize our opportunity that we have in front of us? Or is it just something that lets us band-aid the situation and move on? And we might have to devote extra time to this later. And sometimes you have to do that, but are you doing that consciously? Or are you doing that as a default and you end up increasing the amount of time, energy, resources required to truly solve an issue just because you're in such a hurry up front to get through it? So it's recognizing our values, how they show up in those spaces, and some of the mental shortcuts that we default to in order to check mark the box, in order to reduce our anxiety about not knowing what the right answer is. The other piece that this does is it increases our capacity to tolerate discomfort. Right? A lot of times, whether we're dealing with a difficult clinical situation, whether we're dealing with a difficult programmatic decision, whatever that looks like, oftentimes, again, we have to sit in discomfort because we're dealing with things that make most people uncomfortable in this work. And if the discomfort itself makes us jumpy, drives us to act before we really considered all of the nuance, all of the things involved, then by increasing our tolerance for sitting in uncomfortable spaces and uncomfortable conversations, we increase our ability to get to higher quality solutions. Right? So the quickest choice is not always the best choice. We talk a lot about psychological safety and how do we increase it? How do we build it? Well, again, if all of the team members that are working together in your organization are engaging with one another only around what their functional job role is, and there's no human connection within that, it's really hard to build psychological safety. Right? We don't feel safe with somebody because, well, that's Mike and this is his area of expertise. We feel safe because we begin to understand and know them as a human being. And so how do we, again, slow down enough to where we begin to create spaces that feel psychologically safe as a result of getting to understand the other people that surround us in this work, our teammates, our partners, our colleagues from other organizations, right? To build those relationships that then allow us to take risks together, to feel like we can support one another, even though we're both stepping out on a limb here. Professional resiliency, right? We talk a lot in this field about burnout, about turnover, right? And how much of that comes from exposure to secondary and vicarious trauma. And if all we're doing is swimming in this river of trauma day in and day out, and never pausing long enough to really consider the impact of that, the interesting thing about human emotions is that it impacts us whether we're aware of it or not, right? And so we might as well be aware. We might as well, hey, this is hard. what do we do with it, right? Just acknowledging that it's hard doesn't make it any harder. It actually makes it easier. It normalizes our experience. We have a chance to share with others to support one another and not just feel like we just have to keep dealing with it on our own, which results in people saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Right? Another piece is alignment with some principles that are fairly prominent in areas of infant and early childhood mental health, right? Cultural humility. How do we understand that different people from different parts of the world, different parts of our state, from rural settings versus, mid-city, how do those experiences impact what that person needs in terms of support, in terms of supervision, in terms of lots of things? And so again, if we're always in a hurry, if we're always waiting to check mark the next box, it's really hard to stay curious, right? Our brains very naturally start to make assumptions because we're trying to get ahead of the process. We want to get to the end before we've walked the journey. And by enhancing our ability to be reflective, we're able to stay curious, right? We're tolerating the discomfort of not knowing. We don't know where this is going to go, but let's look around. Let's see what's happening as we're walking this path. And so we enhance our ability to be curious. We also enhance our ability to empathize and perspective take, right? Why is this individual having such a hard time with the hierarchy within our organization? Well, we can make assumptions, or we can be curious about their experience and where that comes from, and empathize with them and connect with them around that, and maybe arrive at a solution far quicker than if we simply project our values onto them, right? So how do we engage all of those opportunities, all of those nuances, rather than, again, moving fast? And this doesn't mean slowing down the nature of our work. It means that we're being intentional about the steps that we're taking. We could still take them relatively quickly, but are we thinking about them, planning them out, or are we just always in movement from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, without slowing down to really gauge what is the impact of this? So talking about this idea of being reactive versus being reflective, right? Reactivity is evolutionarily a part of the human experience. We survive because of our ability to react to danger, react to stress, right? If we're walking through the woods and the stick snaps, our body activates. We go into fight or flight mode, right? We need to do that in order to get ready to run, get ready to fight, get ready to protect ourselves and our loved ones before we can even think about it. Because if we have to think about it, too late, right? The bear got you, you're done. And so reactivity is important. I'm not suggesting that if you're reactive, that it's always a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But when our default is being in this reactive cycle, then we never really get to intentionally choose the course that we're traveling, right? We're just always reacting to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, which limits our ability to use our full brain realistically, right? Because those reactions happen at a very kind of primitive part of our brain. And the cognitive process, the ability to think, to reason, to incorporate what our feelings are telling us, what other people are telling us, doesn't come into those reactions. It comes into the reflection step. And that's what we're trying to get to. So let's kind of break these two down. So reactions are immediate, right? They have to be quick. We need to act. And there are certain situations where you need those immediate processes. They're also don't require planning, right? We're reacting based on, oftentimes on our feelings, right? I feel anxious, so I'm going to react. I feel like I'm in harm's way, so I need to get out of here. They also, because they're so immediate and there's no planning, It offers very limited opportunities to consider other people's feelings, perspectives, the history, the nuance of the situation. We don't have access to that stuff because that's a different part of our brain. We're not sitting there when we're feeling extraordinarily reactive. And we'll kind of touch on that a little bit later as well. The other piece is that this creates a culture of putting out fires. Right? I'm curious if any of you within your organizations, within the work, kind of get a sense of what that feels like. And so I invite folks to put thoughts into chat as we're talking, but just this idea of we're always putting out fires, right? And Desmond Tutu had a wonderful thought on this, right? He talked about folks that work in social services really priding ourselves on being really, really good firefighters or really, really good lifesavers, right? We pride ourselves on jumping into the river, pulling people out, swimming them to safety, doing CPR, resuscitating them, and getting them back on their feet. And if that's our role, and we're always in a life-saving mode, that has some benefits to it, right? We're saving lives, but guess what we're not doing? We're not looking upstream and recognizing that the reason people keep falling into that same river is because the path that takes them from their village to the well where they get drinking water has eroded and is so thin that walking across, people just fall in, right? They can't navigate it while carrying those buckets of water, which they need for their survival. And so if we never fix the path, all we're doing is ensuring that we're going to have to keep saving lives and more of them are going to keep falling in. So yes, we need to be good lifesavers, and we need to pause long enough to realize what's contributing to this issue and how do we fix it? How do we fix that path? Do we build a bridge? Do we identify another source of water where they can get it from? Whatever that solution is. But if we're just in life-saving mode, we never fix the core underlying need. All we're doing is treating the symptom of the need, right? And that's at the individual level, at the community level, at the society level, across the board. And so we get this culture of putting out fires. If we can become more reflective in our work, it builds in more time to be considerate of all of those nuances, right? We're still wanting to be responsive to the need, but it's not a knee-jerk reaction each time something happens. We look at things as individual events, not just, oh yeah, another person fell in the river. What happened? What do we know about this person? What are their needs? How do we support them, right? Lots of different things. So we get to individualized care planning rather than everybody gets the same thing. It also creates more room for intentionality. So guess what? Self-awareness comes into the picture, right? Because again, now we're functioning at our cortical regions of our brain. We can think and reason and plan. It also creates increased openness to other people's experience. How are they feeling? What are their perspectives? What's showing up here? And we get to a place, hopefully, of building a culture that is identifying and addressing the underlying causes of the fire, which over time reduces how many fires we have to put out. And very often we hear about challenges of capacity, right? We have too many children coming into the child welfare system. Our caseloads are too high in our mental health treatment setting, wherever it is. And again, all we're doing by being incredibly reactive is we're ensuring that our capacity will forever be challenged because we're not reducing the flow of people into that system by addressing the core reason for why they're showing up in the first place. If we're able to engage more of these perspective taking, awareness, individualized treatment planning, looking at more macro solutions to community problems, then unfortunately, we're never going to catch up, right? So we have to do the yes and, which can be incredibly difficult. But if we don't, we're always going to be underwater, right? So we have to figure out a way to do both. We have to do the life saving, pulling people out of the river, putting out the fires, and we have to address the causes of those incidents in the first place. The other piece that's important to consider is this idea of parallel process. We talk about this in clinical settings very frequently. We talk about this in early ed settings to some extent. But this idea that relationships impact other relationships, right? So if you have organizational leadership, executive leadership, how they interact with middle management filters down to how middle management interacts with supervisors, how those supervisors interact with staff, how staff works with families, and how those families then support their children, right? It's a parallel process. It all filters down. And Jeree Paul, I imagine some of you are familiar with who she was, said that how you are is as important as what you do. Right? The process is as important as the action. How I am, even in presenting today, is as important as the things that I'm saying. Right? Is somebody genuine? Do we feel like they're invested in our growth and development? Or are they just here talking? And there's no investment in the outcome. There's no investment in the community, right? Those pieces are important. And what Maria St. John, Carmen Rosa Noronha, Candace Thomas, what they've contributed to expanding that thought is not just how you are, but it's also who you are, right? Who you are informs how you are. And both of those are as important as what you do. And so our ability to reflect on who we are as we walk into spaces, as leaders, as supervisors, as clinicians, whatever our role, that's important. We have to take stock of what we're bringing with us, because that then informs how we do the thing that we're trying to accomplish. And to quote from their work, our embodied and socially located experiences have to be recognized, reflected on, and factored in. Because again, whether we're aware of those pieces or not, they have an impact in the action, right? And so if they're impacting it regardless, might as well be aware of it so we can make some decisions around how we navigate that, how we build with it or around it in some cases, right, in order to make this work happen more effectively. And that's something that happens, again, at all levels through this parallel process. So that's at the organizational leadership level, right? If we're talking about staff burnout, how do we feel? What are our backgrounds, right? If you as an organizational leader come from a middle-class, blue-collar working background, and it's been stressed to you from the day you were born that the hard work is value and you show up and you earn your salary, do you think that might have some weight in how you hear staff complaints about their working conditions? I would guess that it does, right? And so it's all of these different examples, all of the different ways in which we experience the world that then we bring into these conversations. And our awareness helps navigate those more effectively, not just for ourselves, but for the people we come into contact with, for the people that we lead, supervise, support, all of the folks around us, right? Going back to the idea of kind of where we are in our brains, reactivity versus being more reflective. And so Bloom's taxonomy talks about kind of our ability to engage different systems within our brains, depending on our ability to be regulated in the moment, right? Do we feel overwhelmed and stressed out and rushing, or are we calm and perceptive and intuitive and curious, right? Very different experiences. And so think about the last time you were heading out for work in the morning. Something happened at home that made you late, right? Maybe it's your kids spilled water on their backpack and their clothing, and you had to change them. Maybe there's, I don't know, there's road work happening right in front of your street and you can't leave your block, and so you're stuck, whatever it is, right? Something happened, unpredictable. And you finally get out of there and you're rushing to a meeting, and you walk in, you have almost no idea on what is actually happening in that meeting, what the agenda is, what's being talked about, right? So in that mind space, how easy is it, do you think, to be creative, to evaluate some of the information that you're hearing, to analyze it? Pretty hard, right? At best, you're probably going to struggle to remember what that meeting was about. I know I've had those situations. And so think about if your usual typical day feels like that morning. If you're just constantly running from thing to thing, you're overwhelmed, and there's never an opportunity to just slow down. At least you feel like there is. How much creativity do you engage in, right? What's your ability to apply learning from past experience and drive that forward into the things happening and being planned for in strategic planning, in program development, in staffing decisions, in resolving challenges within your organization, whatever that looks like, right? And so the more regulated we are, neurologically, physiologically, right? This is like your heart rate is at your normal resting heart rate. You're not super all over the place and feeling jittery. You've gotten good sleep. You're able to show up and be present. The more of that you have, the higher up on this pyramid you are in terms of your functioning capacity, right? So our ability to navigate these situations effectively is based on what we talked about earlier, our capacity to sit in discomfort without becoming so uncomfortable that we jump to reactivity, right? All of those pieces show up at all organizational levels. And if we take a look at Yuri Bronfenbrenner's work, right, bioecological model, it's kind of the same idea as the parallel process, but in a little bit more of a macro perspective, right? And so the idea, as Bronfenbrenner talked about, there are these different systems that exist, right? There's the individual. Around that individual is their family, the people closest to them. That baby and family then exists within the context of their community. That community exists in the context of society, and all of those things are changing over time, right? And so all of these different spheres, concentric circles, right? They all influence each other. There's bidirectional relationship amongst all of them. So if you map this out similarly within your organization, right? And so at the center, you have the baby that you're trying to serve and the family that surrounds them. Around that is community supports, right? Service providers, housing, all of those pieces. That exists within your local ecological system, right? Funding, politics, processes of establishing new pilot programs, and political leadership changing and oversight and all of those different things, right? All of that happens in the context. And so if we think about how do we show up in conversations about writing policy, how do we show up in conversations about program development, how do we show up around organizational culture and leadership and supervision and how those things happen? All of that filters down to the experience of the families and the little ones that come into our systems, right? And if we can be a little bit more reflective in each of those, right? If each person within your organization is, I don't know, 5% more intentional in the choices that they make, collectively, that's a lot of impact. right? So we're not talking about going from rushing all over the place to being perfectly balanced. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing. And there's a lot of research that shows in practice, it's really small commitments that really produce significant gains. There was a study, and I'm happy to link to it later because I didn't include it in the references, but there's a study of home visitation nurses, right? Public health nurses going home to home, visiting, doing, kind of collecting biological markers and how people are doing, heart rate, blood pressure, all that kind of stuff. And they're serving 30, 40 patients a day, right? They're just going place to place to place. And they had them do one simple thing. Before you ring the doorbell, take 10 seconds and just check in with yourself. How am I feeling? And what do I hope for this upcoming appointment, right? 10 seconds, literally. That's the only change to their overall practice. And when they evaluated both client ratings of their experience and the nurse's own experience of how burnt out they felt, both were significantly reduced as a result of that. So you figure 30 sessions a day, 10 seconds a session, that's 300 seconds, that's 5 minutes of investment. 5 minutes to produce significant outcomes, both for the patients and for the staff, right? So we're talking about different ways that we can bring this about. It's not just wholesale, everybody has to go and, develop the capacity to be a reflective facilitator, right? That's not what we mean. Where are our opportunities naturally in the course of our work to be more intentional about what we do and how we do it? And so with that, I wanted to create a little bit of time for us to think together. So I definitely welcome folks, put thoughts, questions, ideas in chat, in Q&A, and invite folks to, well, we can't really come off mute, but definitely use that chat. And what's coming up for you? What thoughts are you having as it relates to your work in the context of what we're talking about today? Open to having some conversations with all of you. Yeah, thank you, Laura. Appreciate that thought. Yeah, just a simple suggestion of just checking in, right? Whether it's before serving your clients, whether it's before walking into a supervision meeting. How do I feel, right? Going through those, like reflection before action, that's really where that shows up. What am I bringing with me? And how does that inform how I plan to exist in this space that I'm about to enter? Simply doing that it anchors you in the moment, right? It brings you into the present. So you're not thinking about what's happening tomorrow. You're not thinking about what happened earlier. You're in the here and now. And that presence allows you to be more connected to the things happening. It also allows you to begin to, whether the word is compartmentalize or really identify of what I'm feeling, right? I've got a lot of feelings in me right now. So I'm excited, I'm feeling a little anxious, and I'm still kind of sad from a conversation I had earlier, right? Well, the thing I'm excited about is that it's my birthday tomorrow. The thing I'm feeling sad about is the fact that I had a difficult conversation earlier. Those things have nothing to do with the session I'm about to walk into, right? Very little to do. And so how do we recognize, well, okay, so I'm still feeling anxious Am I anxious because of what's happening or what's about to happen? Do I feel ill-prepared for this session, for this meeting? Is this a difficult client? Am I having a difficult conversation with my supervisee? Whatever that looks like, right? If you're able to identify that, and this doesn't, you don't have to sit there for hours thinking about this. You can, especially with a little bit of practice, you can get pretty quick. You start to identify that. And once you name it, you're able to use that information to inform your engagement, right? So lots of opportunities within that. Recognizing other comments, let me just catch up. Yeah, just a reminder about being present with the individuals we serve, right? And again, it doesn't take a lot of time. And it's a capacity that we build, right? It's called reflective practice, just like yoga is a practice. You don't show up to your first yoga class with the idea that you're going to master all of the positions right away. But guess what? The more you do it, the better you get at it, the easier it becomes. You become more limber, more flexible, right? You're able to tolerate the discomfort. You're a little bit less self-conscious because you're like, hey, everybody's doing this thing. And that practice piece is really, really critical because that, again, that gets us to expand our ability to deal with things in this type of way, in a more purposeful, intentional, reflective way, rather than in a reactive way. Ruth is sharing the idea of kind of using a next step question right after the check-in. So who's in the room? How do they seem? And then the second question covering kind of a how are people feeling, right? It's kind of like doing a body scan, but really we're scanning the environment. What are people's postures? What do we know about tensions that exist, right? Let's say we're at a trans organizational meeting trying to decide some big thing in our community, right? Active community team, for example, within Safe Babies work. And there's a topic of debate. And we walk into the space and we already know, you know what? There's a little bit of history between the child welfare leadership folks and the people from this particular mental health agency. There's a little bit of tension there. What can we do with that knowledge, right? How do we actively utilize that to engage folks, to bring them closer together, to see each other's perspective, recognizing that that history informs the dynamics in the space, right? So again, whether it's individual work, whether it's organizational work, a lot of these concepts apply universally. It's, are we practiced enough to bring this into the space that we're entering? And it's a lot easier to then support line staff in doing these practices if it becomes a part of organizational culture, which means everybody is bought in. Within Safe Babies, whether it's our national director or whether it's our support staff, every single person is participating in a reflective practice at some frequency and level, right? And so we're trying to build everybody's capacity to sit in these spaces together. Yeah, great question. Like, how do we introduce this, right? What are some techniques as a first step or two to introduce staff or students to try more reflective practice? Again, I like the idea of modeling, right? So if you're facilitating a meeting space, whether it's just a weekly meeting or whether it's a specific reflective practice session, narrate yourself being reflective, right? Well, that's a great question. Here are some of the considerations that are coming up for me, right? And here are some of the nuances that come into that. And by the way, hearing that question initially made me a little bit nervous because I wasn't sure how I was going to answer it. And I recognized where that comes from. And that helped me navigate my reactivity so that I can stay curious and hear the fullness of what you were asking and put it into the context of the situation that you're talking about, right? So kind of narrating that process. What are you doing that's more reflective, that can be modeled and narrated? Because just doing it, some people are oblivious, right? So how do we name it? The other piece is like, how do you start your meetings? What's the culture, right? Is it, all right, agenda item number one, let's talk about everybody's getting a 5% salary reduction, right? Versus having some genuine human interaction at the beginning of meetings. 3, 5 minutes, right? What we've started doing is every meeting starts with a reflective question. And there are different people. There's kind of a rotating, cycling list of folks who are coming up with that reflective question. And it could be, what is your favorite childhood memory, right? Or smell that you remember from your childhood? It could be, what's one thing that you're excited about coming up this week in your work life, right? It could be, what's something that you've struggled with professionally and how did you overcome it, right? Whatever it is. But it's presenting those questions, and people are just typing into chat, and maybe some people feel brave enough to come off of Zoom, or if you're sitting in a room together, you're having this conversation. But it's giving people an opportunity to, again, practice those skills, because some people are going to feel less comfortable, some people are going to feel more comfortable. But in the facilitation of those conversations, people are, again, expanding their ability, and they're learning more about each other. They're modeling for one another, so you get peer-to-peer learning that's happening at the same time as we're building the relationships within our team. Because now Betty isn't just the person that handles our billing. Betty is the person who loves the smell of chocolate chip cookies baking because it reminds her of her grandmother, right? So we're creating a deeper sense of connection, a deeper sense of relationship, that when I have to go to Betty with a difficult question, I am buffered by that knowledge of just the humanness that we share together, right? It's not just, oh yeah, she's the billing person, I don't know a thing about her beyond that. So it creates different opportunities in that space. I hope that description is helpful. Other thoughts, questions? I know we have a little bit of housekeeping at the end, but we definitely have time for a couple more. Was there anything I shared today? Because I know I was going fairly quickly through all the slides. Was there anything shared that you guys want me to spend a little bit more time on? I'll keep an eye on chat just in case some more comes in. Oh, there we go, just in time. How to practice pausing to regulate when we notice that we are rushing from thing to thing. Yeah. So the first step, Mary, is in your question, right? How do you notice that you're rushing? How do you notice that you're overwhelmed? Because for many of us, we sublimate it, right? We push it off to the side and we just do the thing because we're so passionate about our work and we're urgent to help others and we're showing up in service. And we don't pause to consider, am I showing up as my full genuine self, or am I just going from thing to thing because I want to be of service and support? And at the same time, the way I'm doing it isn't maximizing my results or my experience, which doesn't sustain me in this work, right? And so step one is just self-awareness, recognizing how you're feeling, pausing long enough and really asking yourself, how do I feel about all this? How do I feel at the end of the day, the end of the week? How am I feeling this month compared to 6 months ago when I first started this role, right? Those questions are a great starting point. And then the next thing is, what is a useful, functional, behavioral, or relational strategy that helps, right? For some folks, it's I'm going to go for a walk before lunch, and then that helps me get centered. For some folks, it's I'm going to do a couple of 3, 4, 5 just deep breaths when I'm feeling this way, and that helps me settle. For some folks, it's I'm going to have an opportunity to talk to a dear friend who gets this work later this week, and we're going to make sure that we connect with one another. For other folks, it's we're going to have a work group, right, or a reflective group, and really advocate for that in the context of our workplace. Bring in an external or an internal facilitator of that space so we can all reflect together and start to unpack some of the challenges that really are genuinely present in the work that we do, right? So there's lots and lots of different things. But I do want to highlight, right, we have this idea of self-care being a priority. And I think there is some responsibility on the part of direct service staff, on all of us, to take care of ourselves. At the same time, we have to also take care of each other, right? And so at the organizational level, we can't continue to put the burden of self-care onto line staff when our organizational policies and practices are antithetical to that self-care, right? We can't say, yeah, take care of yourselves, but no time off ever. We're not approving anything, and you need to meet 110% productivity and complete all your notes on your own time. That's not an environment that is supportive of self-care, right? And so there is some organizational responsibility for creating practices and policies that then allow people to take care of themselves. And at the organizational level, allow us as organizations to take care of the folks that are doing the work. There has to be joint interest in that. I think there might have been a hand raised, but I'm not seeing that. All right, so I'll keep an eye on chat. And a couple more things. So one being, I know we've all gone to trainings and we have, a stack of dust-covered PowerPoint printouts and binders laying somewhere in our office, right? And the idea is that we don't learn from experience alone. We learn from reflecting on our experience. And so my encouragement to all of you is to engage, right? To have these conversations, whatever nugget you take away from today's time together, bring it into shared space, right? Talk to your supervisors, talk to your leaders in your organization, talk to your staff, talk to colleagues and peers. How do we apply this? Here are some ideas that we heard today. Is this something that can help us achieve our vision and mission organizationally, right? Having those conversations, having ongoing investment in thinking together about some of these ideas should hopefully help manifest some of the outcomes that we're aiming for in the earlier slides, right? The other piece is reach out. I invite you guys, shoot me an email. Email's right there. And if I can be a support in any way or share some resources with you, or if you have any questions, obviously happy to engage and connect. We do have some reflective practice resources through the Safe Babies program. We have a reflective case review document that elevates some considerations for how to engage in case reviews in a more reflective way. We have a series of just articles ranging from the last 10, 15 years around reflective practice in different settings. There's also a ton of other resources out there, both through the Alliance. There's some stuff through the Reflective Supervision Collaborative. There's lots and lots of information out there. So I'm happy to be a resource if you would like to reach out. And finally, and this is getting us into your CEs. there's this code. And Laura, I invite you to come back on because I don't know how to direct them to use it.
Of course. So if you're interested in getting a CEU for attending this webinar, the code for today is 9250. When we're done here, I'll send out an email with a survey to everyone who registered and attended today's webinar. And then you can fill that survey out and put the code 9250, and you'll get that CEU emailed to you. Just as a reminder, the formatting of the survey works best for a computer, not a mobile device. And if you are using a mobile device, please make sure that you see there's 5 options to choose from. So you just need to scroll to the side to see those options. Right. Thank you again, Dr. Sherman. Our next webinar will be June 17th, and it'll be another look into reflective practice, but through a reflective supervision lens, and how to support a reflective stance in supervisors and clinicians. So we hope to see you all there next month. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great day.